In 1917, the world was introduced to something truly amazing. Something that not only captured the attention of individuals everywhere, but also introduced millions to the magic that might possibly surround us in our everyday lives. A series of photographs taken by two young girls in Cottingley, England, were revealed to show them interacting and playing with several tiny winged creatures in the woods behind their home. They were astonishing photographs that, for some, solidified the existence of fairies and otherworldly creatures living among us. But to others, the pictures seemed a little off. They appeared rather two-dimensional, almost flat-like. The light reflecting off the forest foliage and the young girls doesn't quite match up with the light reflecting off the small dancing creatures. However, any doubt of the picture's authenticity was swiftly put to rest as photographic experts and studious academics examined the black and white negatives and found no evidence that the photographs were faked. For many, the existence of small fairy folk became a reality. But to the skeptics, they were faced with a hair-pulling hoax that begged to be debunked. I'm your host, Jordan Hopkins, and welcome back to another episode of Moonlight Lore. For many of us, especially when we fondly harken back to our younger years when we were children, the world seemed like a magical place. There was new knowledge flowing through our lives that we attempted to capture to the best of our abilities, new people to interact with each passing day, and bizarre, interesting creatures behind every corner, waiting for our young, imaginative, and inquisitive minds to discover. In truth, when we were younger, our perspective of the world around us was indeed quite mysterious. It's been this way for every single human on Earth. At some point in all of our lives, we've wondered the same thing. What hidden secrets have we yet to uncover? Thankfully, the world is full of people who have never stopped asking that question. Everywhere you look, professionals in every field of study and work have sought out new techniques, new explanations, and most fascinating of all, people continue to search for new discoveries to be made. As humans, we are naturally curious of the unknown. Our constant quest for knowledge seems to have no limits. But unfortunately, this quest can be corrupted by certain individuals. Sometimes the lust for discovering can lead to what some may delicately say, embellishments. Unfortunately, this is the reality we live in. People want their names known. They want to have a following, fame. And although the advancements we have made as a society over the years have helped disprove many claims or so-called pieces of evidence, it doesn't stop people from believing they can pull a fast one on us. And sometimes they may just succeed. Today's episode is a little different than most I have covered on the podcast in the past. Where most episodes I either try to approach with a skeptical point of view or leave the episode entirely open-ended altogether, ending the episodes with no definite answers or not. This episode only has one ending and cannot be refuted in any way. Today I'm discussing the Cottingley Fairies, a series of photographs taken by two young girls in Cottingley, England, who managed to fool the world with their clever photographic skills. As I mentioned in the opening, these photographs were quite unique at the time as Photoshop didn't quite exist just yet, and the pictures displayed wondrous scenes of these two young girls playing and interacting with small fairies. Many people were very taken aback upon first sight of the photographs. To many, it solidified the existence of magical creatures, the unknown finally being brought into the light of our world. If the internet was around at the time, these pictures likely would have broken it. So who were the ones behind the camera? Who were the clever young women who solidified their place in the history books as the two who helped introduce so many to the hidden world of fairy folk? Who helped solidify the existence of fairies for young children everywhere, and who ensured their legacy would never die? Well, as it would turn out, This incredible story began quite innocently. There was no ill intent, nor were the creators after any sort of fame or fortune like some may have expected. It was actually all done by the imaginative minds of two young girls, one no older than 16 and the other 9. The curious case of the Cottingley Fairies began in the warm summer months of 1917 in a small West Yorkshire village known as Cottingley. It was a quiet, peaceful setting far off from the dangers of the Western Front in Europe as soldiers from different nations fought tirelessly for control. Thankfully, though, the war didn't seem to affect the Griffiths family as they traveled from the warm sandy beaches of South Africa to the cooler, forested landscape of England. At the time, Frances Griffith was only 9 years old when she traveled to the Northern Hemisphere with her mother to visit relatives. She was excited to see her older cousin once again and regularly fantasized about what sorts of adventures the two would find themselves delving into. 10,000 kilometers away, anticipating Frances's arrival, was 16-year-old Elsie Wright. Equally excited as her younger cousin and already plotting out their activities for the visit, she began scouting out locations behind her house to explore. She was fortunate to live near such a lush wooded valley that hosted a small gentle stream locally known as Cottingley Beck. The edge of the water peacefully ran along the foot of their back garden, trickling over rocky outcrops and often shaded by overgrown trees. The perfect place to regularly find yourself lost in. It quickly became a favorite for the two cousins, who quite frequently spent the first half of their summer playing among the thick trunks of the trees or splashing each other with the refreshing blue water from the stream, which would often result in them being scolded by their parents for always coming back to the house in an untidy state. When often asked why the two always enjoyed spending their days in the wild, collecting dirt on their clothes and under their fingernails, they always responded with the same answer: "We went to see the fairies." Obviously, to any adult who has children, you would likely pass this response up to your child's overactive imagination. The thing was, Elsie was a little too old to be talking like this. She was a teenager rapidly approaching adulthood, so this was quite odd to say the least. Perhaps she only said it though to appease the sense of wonder that she saw in her younger cousin Frances. Still though, when questioned in private, she held true to her statement that her and Frances had gone into the woods to play with fairies. As a response to this foolish notion, Elsie's parents, Arthur and Polly, undoubtedly scoffed and scolded their daughter for continuing to act like a child. There was no such thing as fairies. They were make-believe creatures born from fairy tales and storybooks. Well, hearing this from her closed-minded parents didn't sit right with Elsie. She decided if they weren't going to believe her and Frances, that she would show them proof of the little creature's existence, that she was right and they were wrong. Borrowing her father's camera, the two young girls ventured back out into the glen to search for the magical creatures, and within the hour, they came rushing back to the house with a roll of film that, unbeknownst to any of them, would become world famous for holding real, undeniable proof that otherworldly creatures were really out there. Arthur Wright's surprise peaked when the two girls came rushing through the back door of the house, explaining they had proof of the fairy's existence. Of course, he still had a little skepticism on his mind, but he entertained the notion and reacted in a whimsical way to appease the girls' excited attitudes. As a keen amateur photographer, Arthur happened to have created his own darkroom in the house and owned all the necessary equipment required to develop the film the girls had filled with their make-believe creatures. So by the afternoon, Arthur held in his hand a photograph that was certainly quite interesting to say the least. However, similar to how if you looked at the photo nowadays, you would notice it would seem a little off, Arthur found himself a bit confused. There was no doubt the girls had somehow captured something on the camera. He just didn't really know what exactly he was looking at. The photo that would become world famous shows Frances, her head slightly tilted, gazing towards the camera. Around her are several winged fairy figures dancing and playing a flute, though they definitely don't look like they belong. Arthur's suspicion immediately grew. He knew his daughter Elsie had developed a similar interest as he had in photography and knew she had a particular talent for art and retouching photographs. Arthur remained unconvinced that it was authentic. He quickly realized the girls had gone to great lengths to try and pull one over on him. The only problem was he had no earthly idea how they had done it. How had they managed to create this spectacularly odd photo while he was the one developing it? With no clear, definite answer, he opted to allow the girls this one fantasy, to allow them to hold on to that sense of childlike wonder and magic, because he knew it was fleeting with each passing year. The two girls at the time refused to spill their secrets on how they had captured such an amazing photo, so the parents decided to drop the topic altogether. Everyone except Elsie's mother, Polly. Polly had taken a very different view on the subject. She had found a great interest in the theosophical movement that was taking place during the time and found herself helplessly intrigued by the fantastical image. 2 short months later, the girls returned to their parents with another photograph, this time showing Elsie sitting on the grass with a single gnome-like creature about 6 inches tall. It wasn't until 2 years later did the photos finally become recognized by the public. At the nearby city of Bradford, a meeting of the Theosophical Society drew Polly to attend, and with her she brought the odd photographs firmly tucked away in her purse. Appropriately, the subject of discussion in that evening's lecture was the topic of fairy life, and if fairies and other little folk could possibly live among us. While at the meeting, when the floor was open up to the public to ask questions or provide information, Polly happened to reveal she had proof of the existence of fairies, which in turn caused the energy in the room to become quite enthralling. Half of the crowd doubted she truly had any tangible evidence, but were still captivated by what she had to say. The other half were more than eager to see what she meant. One of the society's leading members, Edward Gardiner, became especially interested in what Polly had to show them, and once the black and white images were shared amongst the group, he saw an opportunity. The photographs shared by Polly were an important spiritual message in his eyes. The images were supernatural proof of the existence of fairies. They represented a powerful piece of evidence in favor of the society's brand. Much to Polly's pleasure, Gardner then spoke with her, informing her that her daughter must be extraordinarily strong spiritually to be able to coax these little creatures to reveal themselves to her. He then asked Polly if he might showcase the photographs at the Society's annual conference a few months later, to which Polly avidly agreed. While Edward Gardner was in possession of the photos, he handed them off to a friend and colleague, Harold Snelling, a photographic expert who examined the images of the two girls and small fairies and confirmed, similar to Arthur Wright, that the photographs were not tampered with in any way. Taking great care in his phrasing, he said, they were authentic images of what was in front of the camera, his way of neither confirming nor denying the existence of the fairies. But this statement and test was good enough for Gardner. The fact the photos were authentic only solidified his belief that fairies were indeed real. Soon, Gardner took it upon himself to make copies of the photos to share at his lectures and then sell to his peers afterwards. The photos then appeared in spiritualist magazines that not only captured the eye of the public, but also the attention of celebrated creator of Sherlock Holmes, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, a newfound believer in spiritualism himself. At the time, he was gearing up to write a piece on fairies for the Christmas edition of the Strand magazine, and had sent a letter to Arthur Wright and Elsie asking for permission to use the images in his writings. By this point in time, the Cottingley Fairies had become a household name. People couldn't get enough of this story, and as more and more fell for it, the harder it became for anyone to disprove it. Over the course of the next several months, camera technicians and photographic experts studied the images taken in 1917, but could not come to a solid conclusion on how they were made. The photos themselves were genuine. There was no tampering involved. but very few were willing to stake their names on the claim that they were authentic. The notion that fairies were real was one that the experts refused to acknowledge. With the eventual conclusion of the Great War in Europe came more inquiries to this astonishing story, this time from a man we would not have expected. 3 years after the first 2 pictures had been taken and shared with the world, Edward Gardner paid a visit to the 2 young girls, Elsie, now 19, and Frances, 12. Unfortunately, he was not after the truth. He wanted more, what he considered to be proof. He wanted further photographs of the strange little creatures who inhabit Cottingley Beck to be taken, but he wanted to make sure there was no tomfoolery taking place. He provided the girls with his own camera, with 12 photographic plates that he had secretly marked ahead of time. It was a way to ensure the girls produced genuine photographs of the fairies with his own camera and film, to make sure they couldn't switch the film out for something altered. Surprisingly, the girls complied, but similar to before when they had taken the original 2, they requested the adults remain in the house. Apparently, the fairies would refuse to appear if anyone else was around. Once more, the 2 girls journeyed into the small valley, only to emerge an hour later with 3 more photos. Both of the girls had their own picture taken with a single fairy, and a third photograph displayed a group of them dancing through the grass. Again, it was widely accepted by many that the girls were special, that they could contact fairy tale creatures and lure them into the open for a quick snapshot. Eventually, though, as these sorts of things often do, interest in the fairies not only waned for the public, but also Elsie and Frances as they grew older. No more pictures were taken in the glen, and the 2 only ever seemed to want to distance themselves from the situation as best they could. Perhaps it was the desire for a normal life, out and away from the spotlight of eccentric believers. Maybe they simply outgrew the sense of wonder and fascination that came with childhood. They grew older, got married, moved on. But maybe it was something else entirely. The odd story sat still for quite some time. With no new developments or pictures, the public quickly neglected the legend of the Cottingley Fairies and all but moved on. Except for one man. James Randi, a man notoriously known for debunking strange legends and peculiar rumors, took an interest in the case in 1978. He launched an investigation into the photographs and agreed with the experts that the fairies displayed in them looked out of place. Randi's search led him down multiple rabbit holes, but ultimately came to an end when he was searching through several pages of a children's book titled Princess Mary's Gift Book, printed in 1914. What he discovered, flipping through the pages, were pictures of women posed in precisely identical poses as all the fairies seemed to have been in the photographs. The only thing they lacked were the wings. It wouldn't be until a few more years later in 1983 would the truth finally be revealed by the one who concocted the whole story. Nearing the end of her life, Elsie decided to go public with the news that she had indeed faked the Cottingley Fairy photos. She had taken images from books, drew and attached wings to the figures she had cut out, affixed them to the forest foliage, then snapped the photos. She also admitted the 2 of them felt rather embarrassed that so many people were convinced they had taken genuine photographs of fairies, especially Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, one of the most influential authors in Britain at the time. Ultimately, the 2 decided to remain quiet about the authenticity of the pictures. They figured if the pictures brought joy and interest to people, surely it couldn't hurt to let them believe such creatures could exist in our world. At the time, the world truly needed a sense of magic and wonder once again, a way to escape the harsh and cruel realities that came with the First World War. Even Sir Arthur himself suffered loss during this time, after his own son was killed in Europe, so perhaps a brilliant mind like his was simply longing for an escape, to once more discover that spark that seemed to accompany so many children as they excitedly explored the new world around them. It's not as if the photographs were at all convincing all on their own. To believe that they were real, people had to want to believe. I can't think of a better example of this than one of the creators of the Cottingley Fairies herself. Although Elsie had revealed in '83 that they had faked the photographs, Frances, on the other hand, up until the day she died, insisted that the fifth photograph they had taken was genuine. Perhaps we might consider the idea that while Elsie had played the bigger role in creating the fairies, Frances, in her older age, recalled things a little differently. At such a young age, being exposed to a story like this, being told by the adults in your life that it was true, then living most of your life believing that, it may cause one in their later years to have misremembered and indeed truly thought it happened. Though it is quite odd that Frances would collaborate Elsie's confession and admit that it was all just a clever bit of fun, except for the fifth photograph. Perhaps somewhere out there in the lost, forgotten corners of Great Britain's green and dark forests are supernatural beings still carelessly dancing and singing, living their secret lives somewhere. It may be only a matter of time when they decide to reveal themselves, and we end up with another case similar to that of the Cottingley Fairies. As always, thank you all for tuning in to another episode of the Moonlight Lore podcast. It's always great to have you join me here on these weird little mysteries. If you happen to enjoy this particular episode or any of the other ones I have done in the past, I have just a couple requests for you. This first one only takes a couple seconds to do, but if you could go into whatever app you may be listening on right now, and if they have the option, could you give the podcast a 5-star review? Spotify and iTunes are the biggest ones, and not everyone leaves a review, so if you could help out the show by leaving 5 stars, it would go a long way in helping the show rise in the podcast charts. The second thing I'll ask is if you could share or recommend the show to your friends or family who you think might be interested in listening to some of the content I write and talk about on here. By growing the audience, that too helps the numbers grow, and thus helping the podcast rise on the podcast charts to become more popular. Both of these are great simple ways to help out, and I would really appreciate any help you guys want to give. But if you want to go a little further than most and help the show financially, please consider donating to the Patreon page. Donations go towards the upkeep of the show, like hosting costs, editing and recording software, and the website. In exchange for your patronage, I offer a few things on there that might intrigue you, but what most people seem to like are the extra episodes I post on there that the public doesn't get to hear. If you have any questions or simply just want to say hi to me, feel free to reach out to me through Instagram or by email. You should be able to find those links in the description of this episode so long that I have posted them correctly while uploading. Anyways, thank you all again for listening to Moonlight Lore. I really do appreciate all you guys do, from kind words, leaving reviews, or donating. Every little bit helps out. So in the meantime, between episodes, keep being amazing people. Have a chill couple of weeks, and I'll catch you next time with a brand new episode. Take care.